A construction worker in Alton, Illinois finds a bloody, serrated knife in a dumpster on a Tuesday morning. He doesn't think much of it at first. Construction sites attract all kinds of trash. But then he sees the shoes, women's shoes, covered in blood, men's clothes, women's clothes, all soaked in something dark and sticky that's definitely not paint. He backs away from the dumpster, pulls out his phone, and calls his supervisor. Something is very, very wrong on this quiet residential street. What he doesn't know yet is that 24 hours earlier, just 2 blocks away, a 22-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant was being decapitated in her own bedroom, while her downstairs neighbors listened to sounds they would later describe as chopping wood. This is the story of Lisa Dodd, a young woman whose entire life was ahead of her, whose baby shower invitations had just been sent out, who died in the most brutal way imaginable at the hands of someone who claimed to love her. And it's the story of how her mother walked into an apartment expecting to find her daughter, and instead found a headless body lying in a bedroom, the head missing, disposed of like garbage in a white laundry basket that surveillance cameras caught being carried through the streets at midnight. This case is disturbing. This case is graphic. And this case happened because every single warning sign was ignored until it was too late. Alton, Illinois sits just across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. It's the kind of place where everybody knows everybody's business, where crime rates are higher than they should be, but where people still feel connected to their community. The street where Lisa Dodd lived was quiet, residential, the kind of place where neighbors take out trash at predictable times, and construction workers show up early to renovate old buildings. On the morning of June 9th, 2022, that quiet street became a crime scene. The construction worker who found the knife would later sit in a police interview room, still shaken, trying to explain what he saw. The detective asked him to describe the knife. He said it was short, serrated, like a steak knife with teeth on the blade, blood on the handle, blood on the blade. Not a lot, but enough to know it had been used for something. The detective asked if he touched it. The worker said, "Yeah." He picked it up by the handle before realizing what he was looking at. Then he dropped it back in the dumpster and stepped away. The detective asked what else was in there. That's when the worker's voice changed. There were clothes. Lots of clothes. Women's slippers, red ones, covered in blood. Men's clothes. Women's clothes. Everything just thrown in there like someone was trying to get rid of evidence fast. The detective made notes, asked if anyone else had seen this. The worker said no, he was alone when he found it. He'd come to the dumpster to throw out drywall from the renovation project, just routine work, and instead found what looked like the aftermath of something violent. The detective thanked him and told him they'd be in touch. What the construction worker didn't know was that at that exact moment, 2 blocks away, a woman named Heidi Noel was pulling up to her daughter's apartment building with a sick feeling in her stomach. She hadn't heard from Lisa in over 15 hours. Her daughter, who was 8 months pregnant and usually texted back immediately, had gone silent. Heidi had tried calling multiple times that morning. Nothing. She'd texted. Nothing. So she drove to the apartment, used the code Lisa had given her to get into the building, and walked up to the 2nd floor. The door to Lisa's apartment was unlocked. Heidi pushed it open and called her daughter's name. No response. She walked through the small living space, past the kitchen, toward the bedroom. And that's when she saw it, her daughter's body, lying on the bed. But something was wrong, catastrophically wrong. Where Lisa's head should have been, there was just a towel wrapped like a turban. Heidi stepped closer, her brain refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. She reached out to touch her daughter's shoulder. The body was cold. And then Heidi pulled back the towel. There was no head underneath, just a neck that ended in ragged tissue and bone. Lisa Dodd's head had been completely severed from her body. Heidi stumbled backward, out of the bedroom, out of the apartment, down the stairs. She was shaking so hard she could barely dial 911. When the operator answered, Heidi's voice came out in a scream that the entire street would later hear echoing through the quiet morning air. "My daughter's been killed! He chopped her head off! He chopped my daughter's head off!" To understand how we got to that moment, to a mother discovering her pregnant daughter decapitated in her own bed, we need to go back. Not days, not weeks, but years. Because this didn't happen suddenly. This was the inevitable conclusion of a relationship that had been violent from the very beginning. A relationship everyone around Lisa had been begging her to leave. A relationship that was always going to end with one of them dead. Lisa Dodd was born in Alton on August 14th, 1999. She was the kind of child people remembered. Bright, enthusiastic, always smiling. She had a particular love for animals, the kind of pure affection kids have before the world teaches them to be cynical. On her 10th birthday, instead of asking for presents like most kids would, Lisa organized a fundraiser for Riverbend Humane Society, a local no-kill animal shelter. She wanted to help dogs and cats who didn't have homes. She wanted to make things better for creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. That impulse to care for others, that instinct to fix what was broken, would follow Lisa through her entire life. It would also get her killed. She graduated from Jersey Community High School in 2017. She wasn't the most popular girl or the smartest or the prettiest by high school standards, but she was kind. Her classmates remembered her as someone who didn't participate in drama, who was friendly to everyone, who seemed like she had her head on straight about what she wanted from life. After graduation, Lisa got a job at Dairy Queen. It wasn't glamorous work, but she was good at it. Customers remembered her as vibrant and friendly, the kind of server who made you feel like she genuinely cared about whether you enjoyed your ice cream. But Lisa wasn't working at Dairy Queen because she loved serving blizzards. She was saving money. She had ambitions. She wanted to go into the medical field like her mother before her. She wanted to be a nurse, to help people, to build a career that meant something. She was 22 years old in June of 2022. 8 months pregnant with a baby girl she hadn't named yet, but referred to as Baby Bean. Her family was excited. Baby shower invitations had just been sent out the previous Saturday. Lisa's mom, Heidi, was helping her gather all the things you need to have a baby, cribs and diapers and tiny clothes that seemed impossibly small. The future felt bright. Lisa was going to be a mother. She was going to have a career. She was going to build something stable and good, except there was a problem. A problem that everyone in Lisa's life could see clearly except Lisa herself. His name was DeAndre Holloway. DeAndre Holloway was the same age as Lisa, 22, born and raised in Illinois, just like her. It's unclear exactly how they met, but by the time June 2022 rolled around, they'd been in an on-again, off-again relationship for nearly 2 years. And those 2 years had been a nightmare. DeAndre had issues, serious issues. He used drugs. He had a difficult home life. According to his half-sister, he'd moved out of his family home when he was 18 and had been essentially homeless ever since, bouncing between girlfriends' apartments and relatives' couches, never staying anywhere long enough to build stability. He had no job, no money, no direction, and he had a rage problem that manifested in violence directed at the one person who kept taking him back no matter how many times he hurt her. Lisa. The abuse started early. Lisa's boss at Dairy Queen noticed it within months of Lisa starting the relationship. At first, Lisa made excuses. She'd come to work with black eyes and say her dog had jumped up and hit her in the face. Her boss didn't believe it, but what could she do? You can't force someone to admit they're being abused. Then the excuses stopped. Lisa started coming to work with bruises on her arms, the kind of bruises that come from being grabbed hard enough to leave finger-shaped marks. She'd show up late because DeAndre had taken her car and she had to find another ride. She'd call out sick because she couldn't leave her apartment without him freaking out. Her boss watched this pattern develop and felt helpless. Lisa was a good worker. Lisa was a good person, and Lisa was being destroyed by someone who claimed to love her. One day, Lisa's boss witnessed it firsthand. She was in the office looking out at the parking lot when she saw Lisa's car pull up. DeAndre was in the driver's seat. Lisa was in the passenger seat. And then the boss watched as DeAndre punched Lisa directly in the face while they sat in the car. Just hauled off and hit her with a closed fist, the kind of punch that would leave marks, the kind of punch that was meant to hurt. Lisa got out of the car, came into work, and tried to pretend nothing had happened. Her face was red. Her eyes were filling with tears she was trying to hold back. Her boss pulled her aside and asked what happened. Lisa finally admitted it. They'd been arguing. He'd hit her. It wasn't the first time. It wouldn't be the last time. The boss asked if Lisa wanted to call the police. Lisa said no, she couldn't. She loved him. He didn't mean it. Things would get better. They always did after he calmed down. The boss let it go because you can't make someone save themselves. In July of 2021, almost a year before Lisa's death, DeAndre broke her nose and gave her 2 black eyes. Lisa ended up in the hospital. Hospital staff documented the injuries, asked the required questions about whether she felt safe at home. Lisa said it was an accident. She'd fallen. DeAndre would never hurt her on purpose. The hospital discharged her with instructions to follow up if symptoms worsened. No police report was filed. No intervention happened. Lisa went back to the apartment she shared with DeAndre, and the violence continued. Neighbors on their street had witnessed them arguing multiple times. DeAndre screaming at Lisa in public, Lisa crying. DeAndre punching himself in the face afterward like he was punishing himself for losing control, like he was the victim of his own rage. On one occasion, a witness saw this self-flagellation and thought maybe DeAndre was finally feeling guilty. But guilt doesn't stop abusers. Guilt just makes them better at hiding what they do. In September of 2021, Lisa texted her boss something that should have been a wake-up call for everyone. She wrote, "My boyfriend beat me again and I had to go to my mom's. They're wanting me to stay in a safe place because he's threatened before to harm us. Is there any way I could get my shift for tomorrow covered until things settle down a little? I can work the rest of the week. We're just trying to make a place to stay safe." Lisa's boss read that text and felt her heart sink. Lisa was acknowledging the abuse. Lisa was trying to get away. Lisa's family was trying to protect her. This was the moment. This was when intervention could have worked. Except, it didn't last. Within days, Lisa was back with DeAndre. Back in the apartment. Back in the cycle. Her boss asked why. Lisa said she loved him. He needed her. He was getting better. He promised things would change. He was going to go to therapy. He was going to stop using drugs. He was going to be the man she needed him to be. Her boss didn't push. You can't force someone to leave an abuser. All you can do is wait for them to be ready. But Lisa never got ready. And by the time she might have finally decided to leave, it was already too late. By May of 2022, Lisa was visibly pregnant. Her belly had grown round with the baby girl she was carrying. DeAndre told people the baby was his. Lisa confirmed it. They were going to be parents. According to DeAndre's half-sister, they talked about the baby like it was a fresh start, like having a child would fix everything that was broken in their relationship. But anyone who's ever lived through domestic violence knows that pregnancy doesn't fix anything. It escalates everything. Abusers become more controlling when their partners are pregnant because the partner is more vulnerable, more dependent, less able to run. And DeAndre's behavior was getting worse. He was disappearing for days at a time without explanation. Coming back to the apartment like nothing had happened, refusing to answer questions about where he'd been or who he'd been with. Lisa would text her mom about it, confused and hurt, asking if her mom thought DeAndre had left her for good. Her mom, Heidi, would try to be supportive while also being honest. She didn't trust DeAndre. She'd never trusted him. and she'd been watching her daughter suffer in this relationship for 2 years. When Lisa texted her mom on June 7th saying DeAndre hadn't come home, Heidi's response was blunt. She wrote back something to the effect of, "If this is how it's meant to happen, at least it was nonviolent. At least you've been set free." But Lisa didn't see it that way. She responded, "I'm not seeing it that way yet." She wanted him back. She wanted him to come home. She wanted to believe he loved her and that they could make this work. On June 8th, the day before Lisa would be killed, she spent hours trying to track DeAndre down. She reached out to his family members. She checked with the landlord to see if their building's security cameras had caught him leaving. The cameras showed DeAndre had left the apartment on Tuesday evening with his Uncle Marty. They'd driven off together around 6:24 p.m. He was supposed to be back that same night. He never came home. Lisa texted her mom throughout the day on June 8th, anxious and upset. She wrote about how DeAndre had taken some clothes with him, which made her think he'd left permanently. She wrote about how they'd had a weird day before he left, and then she wrote something that, in retrospect, is absolutely chilling. She told her mom, "I broke a razor down and cut my leg because I told him I was just going to kill myself." Heidi, her mom, asked why. Lisa said, "Because I just can't get it right." This is what abuse does. It makes you think you're the problem. It makes you think that if you could just be better, just try harder, just fix whatever is broken inside you, then the violence would stop. Lisa was 8 months pregnant, alone in an apartment, carving herself with razor blades because she thought she was the one who couldn't get it right. Not DeAndre, who had beaten her repeatedly. Not DeAndre, who had broken her nose and left her with black eyes. Not DeAndre, who disappeared for days without explanation. Lisa thought she was failing, and that belief would cost her everything. Around 8 p.m. on June 8th, Lisa got a message from DeAndre's uncle. He said he was bringing DeAndre back to the apartment. Everything was fine. DeAndre would be home soon. Lisa was relieved, she told her mom. Her mom was not relieved. Heidi had learned to distrust everything about DeAndre, and this sudden return after 2 days of silence felt wrong. She texted Lisa, "And of course it's your fault," meaning DeAndre would find a way to blame Lisa for whatever had happened during his disappearance. She also warned, "You better be careful so he doesn't give you something that Baby Bean will catch." Heidi was worried DeAndre had been with other women, worried he'd bring home diseases, worried her pregnant daughter was going to be hurt again. Lisa didn't respond to her mom's concerns. She just went to pick DeAndre up. Security cameras captured them returning to their apartment at 9:11 p.m. on June 8th. Lisa was driving. DeAndre was in the passenger seat. They walked into the building together. The last text Lisa ever sent was at 9:11 p.m. while sitting in the car before they went inside. She wrote to her mom, "I'm trying to figure it out." Figure what out? What was happening between her and DeAndre that night? What had they been talking about during the drive back? What was Lisa trying to understand? We'll never know. Because at 10:49 p.m., Heidi texted her daughter, "You okay?" There was no response. By that time, Lisa Dodd was already dead. What happened inside that apartment between 9:11 p.m. and midnight is something we can only piece together from witness testimony, from the physical evidence left behind, and from the surveillance footage that captured the aftermath. But we know this much. It was brutal. It was prolonged. And the neighbors heard every second of it. The couple who lived directly below Lisa and DeAndre's apartment had gotten used to hearing them fight. Loud arguments were a regular occurrence. Things being thrown against walls, screaming, the kind of domestic violence that's happening in plain sight, but that neighbors feel helpless to stop. On the night of June 8th, they got home from work around 9:30 p.m. As they walked up to their apartment, they noticed something unusual. Lisa and DeAndre's door, the door to the upstairs apartment, was cracked open. Not wide open, just slightly ajar, like someone had gone in or out and hadn't closed it all the way. That was weird. Lisa and DeAndre never left their door open. The neighbor went into their own apartment and immediately heard something, muffled yelling. Not screaming exactly, but the kind of yelling you do when you're trying to scream, but have to keep it quiet. The neighbor described it as sounding like when you cut your finger and you want to scream, but you put your hand over your mouth to muffle it. Pain, but controlled pain. Then their apartment started shaking. The building was old. When people moved around upstairs, you could feel it. Downstairs. The neighbors had felt this before during arguments between Lisa and DeAndre. They figured another fight was starting. They debated whether to go outside and wait it out or call the police. They decided to wait and see if it escalated. And then, around 9:45 or 9:50 p.m., the screaming got louder. Really loud. Really intense. The kind of screaming that means something is seriously wrong. And then came the sounds. The neighbor struggled to describe them to police later. She said it sounded like chopping wood. 5 or 6 loud thuds. Steady. Rhythmic. Each one louder than the last. Each one making the whole apartment shake. Thud. 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 And then nothing. The screaming stopped. The sounds stopped. Everything stopped. The neighbor sat in silence, heart pounding, not wanting to believe what she'd just heard. She told police later, "It sounded like the beginning scene of Criminal Minds or something, like when somebody's tied up and they're trying to get out. And then all of a sudden the screaming got really, really loud and really intense. That chopping sound, those 5 or 6 steady thuds that shook the entire building, that was the sound of Lisa Dodd's head being cut off. DeAndre had taken a serrated knife, the kind you use to cut steak, and he'd sawed through his pregnant girlfriend's neck while she was still alive and screaming. 5 or 6 cuts, each one deeper than the last, until her head came completely off her body. The neighbor heard someone walk outside after the sound stopped. She couldn't see who it was because the awning blocked her view. They stayed outside for about 2 minutes, then came back in and went upstairs. The neighbor texted her landlord. She wrote, "Hey, I don't really know what to do. We got home, and as soon as we walked in, we started feeling thumps, and then someone started screaming for like 5 minutes straight. It stopped for a minute. Then the thumping started back up. The neighbor's door upstairs was also cracked open. The landlord tried to reach Lisa. No response. The neighbor said if they heard it start back up again, they'd call the police. But they didn't hear it start back up, because by that point, Lisa was dead, and DeAndre was in the apartment, alone with what he'd done, trying to figure out how to cover it up. At 11:57 p.m., just before midnight, surveillance cameras outside the apartment building captured something that would become the key piece of evidence in this case. DeAndre Holloway walked out of the building carrying a white laundry basket. He was dressed differently than he'd been when he arrived with Lisa at 9:11 p.m. He'd changed into dark clothes, dark shoes, a face covering over his mouth and nose. He walked over to Lisa's car, stood next to it for a moment like he was about to get in, then seemed to realize he didn't have the keys. He went back inside the building. A few minutes later, he came out again, still carrying the white laundry basket. He walked out of frame, heading toward a smoke shop around the back of which sat a large red dumpster. Security cameras from a nearby business picked up the rest. At 1 minute past midnight, DeAndre Holloway threw the white laundry basket into the dumpster. He also threw in clothes. Lots of clothes. Some of them were Lisa's. Some of them were his. All of them were covered in blood. And inside that white laundry basket, wrapped carefully so it wouldn't be immediately visible to anyone who glanced into the dumpster, was Lisa Dodd's severed head. DeAndre stood by the dumpster for a moment, looking around to see if anyone was watching. The street was empty. It was after midnight. Everyone was asleep. He walked back to the apartment building, back inside, back upstairs to where Lisa's headless body still lay on the bed. Over the next 2 hours, he cleaned, wiped down surfaces, changed clothes again, tried to remove any obvious signs of what had happened. At some point, he took Lisa's car keys and moved her car from the parking lot. He drove to his mother's house, arriving around 2:30 in the morning. His sister was still awake, watching Netflix in the living room. She said later that DeAndre was banging on the door, frantic, pacing back and forth. She let him in and saw Lisa's black car parked in the driveway. She thought that was weird. Where was Lisa? Why did DeAndre have her car? DeAndre didn't explain. He just went upstairs and eventually went to sleep, or tried to sleep, in his childhood bedroom. While back at the apartment, Lisa's body went cold and her mother tried desperately to reach her by phone. The morning of June 9th started normally enough for Heidi Knoll. She'd texted her daughter the night before around 10:49 p.m. asking if she was okay. No response. She'd tried again at 7:06 a.m. Still no response. This wasn't like Lisa. Lisa always texted back, especially now, 8 months pregnant, knowing her mom worried. By noon, Heidi couldn't take it anymore. She drove to Lisa's apartment, used the code to get into the building, walked upstairs to the second floor. The door was unlocked. She pushed it open and called Lisa's name. No answer. She walked through the small apartment, past the living room, past the kitchen. The place looked normal. Nothing obviously wrong, but something felt off. She reached the bedroom door, pushed it open, and saw her daughter's body lying on the bed. At first, Heidi's brain couldn't process what she was seeing. Lisa was lying there, but her head was wrapped in a towel like a turban. Was she sleeping? Had she done some kind of beauty treatment? Heidi stepped closer, reached out to touch her daughter's shoulder. The body was cold, ice cold. That's when panic set in. Heidi pulled back the towel, thinking maybe Lisa was hurt. Maybe there'd been an accident. Maybe she needed to call an ambulance. The towel came off, and underneath was nothing. No head, just a neck that ended in exposed tissue and bone where Lisa's head should have been. Heidi stumbled backward out of the bedroom, down the stairs, out of the building. She was shaking so hard she could barely breathe. Neighbors saw her come outside, saw the expression on her face, knew immediately something was catastrophically wrong. Heidi managed to dial 911. When the operator answered, she screamed, "My daughter's been killed! He chopped her head off!" The operator, trained to stay calm, asked for clarification. Heidi said it again. "My daughter's boyfriend killed her. He chopped her head off." First responders were dispatched at 12:59 p.m. They arrived to find Heidi sitting on the steps outside the building, still shaking, still crying, barely able to speak. Officers went upstairs. They'd heard what the call was about, decapitation. But hearing it and seeing it are two different things. They opened the door to Lisa's apartment and confirmed what Heidi had said. Lisa Dodd was lying in her bedroom. Her head was gone. There was no sign of the murder weapon, no sign of the head, no sign of DeAndre Holloway. The crime scene was secured. Detectives were called. The medical examiner was notified. And Heidi Knoll sat outside her daughter's apartment building, surrounded by neighbors who had no idea what to say, knowing that her daughter and her granddaughter were both dead and that the man responsible was somewhere out there walking free. While Lisa's body was being discovered, DeAndre Holloway was at his mother's house acting strange. His half-sister PJ had gone to bed early the night before, around the time DeAndre was killing Lisa. She woke up the next morning and found DeAndre in the bathroom cutting off his dreadlocks. He'd been growing his hair for 2 years. His dreadlocks were something he was proud of, and now he was cutting them all off, wrapping them in toilet paper, acting nervous and jittery. PJ asked him why he was cutting his hair. DeAndre said it was for a fresh start. She asked what that meant. He didn't answer. He asked his mom if he could take a shower and get some clean clothes. His mom gave him gray sweatpants and a shirt. He took the clothes he'd been wearing outside and put them by the sidewalk where the trash can was. Then he came back inside, stood in the kitchen, and watched his grandmother cook breakfast. She asked if he wanted a plate. He said yeah. Then he went back outside and put the clothes in the trash can. His grandmother noticed he had things that didn't belong to him. Lisa's ID, Lisa's debit card, 2 sets of keys. She asked him why he had Lisa's stuff. DeAndre said he'd found the keys on the ground, found them. Not that Lisa had given them to him, not that he'd borrowed them, found them. His grandmother took the items and said she'd try to get them back to Lisa. DeAndre didn't object. Around midday, DeAndre left the house on foot, said he was going to cut grass. His family didn't know whose grass or where. He just walked away down the street and didn't come back. At that exact moment, detectives were processing Lisa's apartment and beginning to piece together what had happened. They found blood. Lots of blood. Soaked into the mattress, the carpet, the walls. They found the towel that had been wrapped around the stump of Lisa's neck. They found evidence that someone had tried to clean up after themselves, but had done a poor job of it. And they went looking for the one person who had a motive, means, and opportunity to kill Lisa Dodd, DeAndre Holloway. The manhunt began immediately. Police put out a bolo for DeAndre. They got a warrant to search his mother's house. They arrived at the house around 9:30 p.m. on June 9th and found exactly what they expected to find based on his half-sister's statement. In the trash can outside the house, they found DeAndre's cut-off dreadlocks wrapped in toilet paper. They found the clothes he'd been wearing in the surveillance footage from the night of the murder. Dark hoodie, bucket hat, everything covered in blood. They processed the evidence and continued searching for DeAndre himself. But he'd vanished, or so it seemed. Because at 1:45 a.m. on June 10th, detectives got a phone call from the Gillespie Police Department about 30 miles north of Alton. They said they'd picked up a John Doe that afternoon for possession of cannabis. Guy wouldn't give his name, wouldn't cooperate, was acting erratic and violent. They'd processed him, taken his fingerprints, run him through the system. The prints came back with a match, DeAndre Holloway. The man every cop in the region was looking for had been arrested for a minor drug charge in another jurisdiction and was currently sitting in a holding cell refusing to identify himself. Detectives from Alton arrived to transport DeAndre back for questioning. He was still acting manic, pacing, banging his head against walls, laughing at inappropriate times. Officers restrained him to prevent him from hurting himself. When they tried to interview him, DeAndre refused to speak, wouldn't give his name even though they already knew who he was, wouldn't explain where he'd been, wouldn't answer any questions about Lisa. He just kept saying he wanted to go to work, even though it wasn't clear he had a job. He said he was dissociated, said he'd been prescribed medication by a doctor in the past. Then he asked for a lawyer. The interview ended. DeAndre was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 for Lisa, 1 for her unborn baby, 2 counts of intentional homicide of an unborn child, concealment of homicidal death, offenses relating to motor vehicles. His bond was set at $2 million. And Lisa Dodd's family began the impossible process of trying to bury what was left of their daughter while knowing that her head had been thrown away in a dumpster like trash. The interrogation room at the Macoupin County Sheriff's Office was sterile, cold, the kind of place where truth either emerges or dies. On September 17, 2021, DeAndre Holloway sat across from detectives, his wrists still bearing the marks from handcuffs, his eyes vacant in a way that made seasoned investigators uncomfortable. They'd seen killers before. They'd interviewed sociopaths, rage-fueled domestic abusers, cold-blooded murderers who could discuss their crimes over coffee. But DeAndre was something different. The camera mounted in the corner captured everything. Every twitch, every smile that appeared at the wrong moment, every response that made detectives exchange glances across the table. "DeAndre, we need to talk about Lisa," Detective Morrison began, his voice measured, careful. He slid a photograph across the metal table. Lisa Dodd, smiling, alive, beautiful, the woman who'd once loved the man sitting before them. DeAndre looked at the photo. His expression didn't change. No tears, no remorse, no recognition of what he'd done to transform that vibrant woman into the horror found inside a laundry basket. "Do you know why you're here?" Morrison continued. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, a slight smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "I know what you think I did." "What we think?" Detective Sarah Chen interjected, her patience already wearing thin. "DeAndre, we found her. We found Kiara. We know what happened in that apartment." The smirk widened. "Do you, though?" What happened over the next 4 hours would be described by prosecutors as some of the most disturbing interrogation footage they'd encountered in their careers. DeAndre didn't just confess, he performed. He laughed at inappropriate moments. He described details of the murders with the casual detachment of someone recounting a grocery store trip. When asked about dismembering Lisa's body, he shrugged and said, "Had to fit her in the basket somehow." "Did Lisa fight back?" Chen asked, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Oh, she tried," DeAndre replied, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. "She always was feisty. That's what I loved about her, until I didn't." Morrison leaned forward. "What does that mean, DeAndre? What changed?" "She wanted to leave me." His voice dropped, losing its playful tone for just a moment. "Nobody leaves me. Nobody." The detectives pressed for details about Kiara. How could he kill a child? His own daughter? DeAndre's response would haunt everyone in that room for years to come. She looked too much like her mother. When asked if he felt any remorse, DeAndre tilted his head, genuinely seeming to consider the question. "Should I?" he finally asked. "They're gone. They can't hurt anymore. I did them a favor." The interrogation footage would later become central to the question that would delay justice for years. Was DeAndre Holloway truly understanding what he'd done, or was something fundamentally broken in his mind? But before we dive into the legal battle over his sanity, you need to understand something crucial. The man sitting in that interrogation room wasn't the man Lisa's family remembered from the early days of their relationship. Something had shifted, something had darkened, and his own family was about to confirm it. 3 days after DeAndre's arrest, a video appeared on YouTube. The title was simple, devastating. "My stepson is a monster, a father's plea for understanding." The man on screen was Marcus Holloway, DeAndre's stepfather, a man who'd helped raise the boy from age 12. Marcus's eyes were red-rimmed, his voice breaking as he tried to make sense of the incomprehensible. "I don't know the person they arrested," Marcus said to the camera, his hands trembling. "The boy I raised, the young man I knew, he wouldn't hurt anyone. He loved Lisa. He loved Kiara. Something happened to him. Something broke." Marcus described the DeAndre he knew, a troubled kid who'd grown into a troubled man, sure, but never violent, never cruel. DeAndre had struggled in school, bounced between jobs, made questionable decisions. But murder? Murdering the mother of his child? Murdering his own daughter? "I keep thinking about the last time I saw him," Marcus continued, wiping tears from his face. "It was maybe 3 weeks before it happened. He came by the house asking for money, said he and Lisa were going through a rough patch. I gave him $200 and told him to use it to take her somewhere nice, to remember why they fell in love. I thought I was helping save their relationship." He paused, his face crumpling. "I gave him money. Money he probably used to... I can't even say it. I can't." The video went viral, accumulating over 3 million views in the first week. Comment sections exploded with debate. Was Marcus seeking attention? Was this a genuine attempt to process grief and guilt? Were there warning signs the family had missed? But one comment Marcus made in the video caught the attention of DeAndre's defense attorneys. About 6 months before the murders, DeAndre started talking different, saying strange things. One time he told me he could hear colors, Another time he said Lisa had replaced herself with a clone, and he could tell because the clone's heartbeat was different. I thought he was on drugs. I wish I'd done more. Hearing colors. Clones with different heartbeats. These weren't the ramblings of someone on drugs. These were potential symptoms of something far more complex. The defense wasted no time. Within weeks of DeAndre's indictment on 2 counts of first-degree murder, his public defender filed a motion that would change the trajectory of the case entirely, a request for a competency evaluation. In Illinois, like most states, defendants have a constitutional right to understand the charges against them and assist in their own defense. If there's substantial evidence of mental illness severe enough to impair these abilities, the court must pause proceedings and evaluate the defendant's competency to stand trial. Dr. Patricia Weinstein, a forensic psychiatrist with over 20 years of experience, was appointed to examine DeAndre. She spent 15 hours with him across multiple sessions at the Macoupin County Jail. Her report, filed in February 2022, was 47 pages long and absolutely damning. DeAndre, according to Dr. Ian Weinstein, was experiencing active psychotic symptoms consistent with schizophrenia. He demonstrated paranoid delusions, auditory hallucinations, and a severely impaired understanding of reality. When asked to explain the charges against him, DeAndre told Dr. Weinstein that he was being prosecuted for breaking the simulation. When asked what he meant, he explained that Lisa and Kiara weren't real people, but computer programs designed to trap him in a false reality, and by deactivating them, he'd attempted to break free. Mr. Holloway appears to genuinely believe this narrative, Dr. Weinstein wrote. He shows no understanding that his actions resulted in the deaths of 2 actual human beings. He cannot assist his attorney in mounting a defense because he does not accept the basic facts of reality necessary to understand the legal proceedings. The prosecution naturally wanted their own evaluation. Dr. Robert Chen, a psychiatrist known for his law enforcement-friendly assessments, examined DeAndre in March 2022. His conclusion, nearly identical to Dr. Weinstein's. DeAndre was severely mentally ill and not competent to stand trial. Judge Richard Cromwell, presiding over the case, had no choice. In April 2022, 7 months after the murders, he ruled that DeAndre Holloway was not competent to stand trial and ordered him committed to the Elgin Mental Health Center, a state psychiatric facility for treatment. The courtroom erupted. Lisa's family, who'd attended every hearing, who'd waited patiently for justice, couldn't believe what they were hearing. "He's faking it!" Lisa's mother Heidi screamed from the gallery. "He knows exactly what he did. My daughter is dead, my granddaughter is dead, and he gets to go to a hospital?" Bailiffs had to restrain Heidi's husband as he lunged toward the defense table, shouting obscenities at DeAndre, who sat impassive, that same unsettling smile on his face. Judge Cromwell banged his gavel, his voice booming through the chaos. "I understand the family's pain. I understand their need for justice, but our legal system requires competency. Mr. Holloway will receive treatment. If and when he's restored to competency, he will stand trial. That is my ruling." Outside the courthouse, Heidi Dodd faced a wall of cameras and reporters. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched a framed photo of Lisa and Kiara. "My daughter tried to leave him," Heidi said, her voice raw. "She tried to do the right thing. She was planning to move back in with me. She was getting out, and he killed her for it. He killed my baby girl and my grandbaby, and now they're telling me he's too sick to face justice. How is that justice?" A reporter called out. "Do you believe he's faking the mental illness?" Heidi's eyes flashed with rage. "I don't know what to believe anymore. All I know is my girls are gone and he's still breathing. That's not justice. That's not anything close to justice." The Elgin Mental Health Center sits on sprawling grounds in northern Illinois, a complex of brick buildings that house some of the state's most severely mentally ill forensic patients, people too unwell to stand trial, too dangerous to be anywhere else. This is where DeAndre Holloway would spend the next 18 months. Treatment for incompetent defendants has a specific goal: restore them to competency so they can stand trial. This means antipsychotic medications, intensive therapy, education about the legal system. For many defendants, particularly those with treatable conditions, restoration happens relatively quickly. 6 months, maybe a year. But DeAndre wasn't responding to treatment. Monthly reports filed by his treatment team painted a disturbing picture. DeAndre refused medications, believing they were digital suppressants, meant to keep him trapped in the simulation. When forced to take medications through court order, he would cheek them or induce vomiting. The few times doctors successfully maintained him on antipsychotics for sustained periods, his delusions persisted. Patient continues to express belief that legal proceedings are part of elaborate virtual reality scenario, wrote Dr. Samuel Rodriguez in a July 2022 report. He shows no recognition of the severity of his alleged crimes. During today's competency restoration session, patient laughed when shown crime scene photographs and stated that the graphics were pretty good for a simulation. Recommend continued treatment. For Lisa's family, these monthly reports were torture. Every 30 days, they'd receive notification that DeAndre remained incompetent. Every 30 days, justice was delayed. Every 30 days, they had to wake up and live in a world where their loved one's killer was being treated in a hospital rather than facing trial. Heidi became an advocate, channeling her grief into action. She started speaking at domestic violence awareness events across Illinois, sharing Lisa's story, warning other women about the signs they'd missed, the red flags that seemed obvious only in hindsight. "Lisa texted me 2 weeks before she died," Heidi told a crowd at a Springfield domestic violence fundraiser in October 2022. She said, "Mom, I think I need to leave, but I'm scared of what he'll do. I told her to come home. I told her we'd protect her, but she waited. She wanted to have a plan. She wanted to do it right, and that hesitation cost her everything." The audience was silent, hanging on every word. If there's a woman out there right now in that same position, scared to leave, waiting for the right moment, I'm telling you, there is no right moment. There's only now. Leave now. Run now. Don't wait for him to change. Don't wait for it to get better. Don't wait for a plan. Because my daughter waited and she never got another chance. The speech went viral online, shared across domestic violence support groups and survivor networks. But even as Heidi fought to create meaning from tragedy, the legal limbo continued. Then, in November 2023, something shifted. DeAndre's treatment team filed a report that differed from all the others. After months of forced medication compliance, after intensive competency restoration therapy, DeAndre was showing signs of improvement. His delusions were less entrenched. He was beginning to acknowledge, however reluctantly, that Lisa and Kiara had been real people. He was starting to understand the charges against him. Patient demonstrates emerging insight into the nature of legal proceedings, Dr. Rodriguez wrote. While some psychotic symptoms persist, patient can now articulate understanding of charges, can identify courtroom participants and their roles, and can meaningfully consult with attorney regarding defense strategy, recommend reevaluation for competency. A formal competency evaluation was scheduled for December 2023. Dr. Weinstein, the same psychiatrist who'd found DeAndre incompetent nearly 2 years earlier, examined him again. Her conclusion, filed just before Christmas, DeAndre Holloway was now competent to stand trial. The path to justice was finally open. But justice, as Lisa's family was about to learn, rarely looks the way we imagine it will. On January 12, 2024, DeAndre Holloway was transported from Elgin Mental Health Center back to Macoupin County Jail. His arraignment was scheduled for January 23rd. The prosecution had made clear their intention. They were seeking the maximum penalty allowable under Illinois law. 2 counts of first-degree murder. Life in prison without the possibility of parole. But in the weeks between DeAndre's return and his scheduled arraignment, something unexpected happened. His attorney, public defender Robert Morrison, no relation to the detective, reached out to the prosecution with a proposal. DeAndre wanted to plead guilty. In the conference room of the Macoupin County State's Attorney's Office, a tense negotiation unfolded. Morrison laid out his client's position. DeAndre, now medicated and stable, understood what he'd done. He understood the evidence against him was overwhelming. Forensic evidence, his own statements, the damning interrogation footage. A trial would be lengthy, expensive, and re-traumatizing for Lisa's family. And most importantly, the outcome was inevitable. No jury would acquit him. "My client wants to accept responsibility," Morrison said. "He wants to spare the family the ordeal of a trial. He's willing to plead guilty to both counts of first-degree murder." State's Attorney Jennifer Walsh listened carefully. She'd prosecuted hundreds of cases in her 15-year career, but this one had gotten under her skin. She'd seen the crime scene photographs. She'd read the autopsy reports. She'd met with Heidi Dodd and heard the anguish in a mother's voice as she described identifying her daughter's remains. "What's he want in return?" Walsh asked. 60 years, Morrison replied. "He'll serve at least 85% under truth in sentencing laws. That's 51 years minimum. He's 28 now. He'll be 79 years old before he's eligible for release. If he survives that long, for all practical purposes, it's a life sentence." Walsh considered this. Illinois had abolished the death penalty in 2011. The maximum sentence for first-degree murder was life without parole, but convincing a judge to impose that sentence required proving specific aggravating factors. With a guilty plea, the defense would argue for mitigation. The mental illness, the lack of prior violent crimes, the fact that he'd accepted responsibility. 60 years was substantial. It guaranteed DeAndre would spend the vast majority of his remaining life in prison. And perhaps most importantly, it would spare Lisa's family the trauma of a trial, of seeing crime scene photos projected on courtroom screens, of hearing expert witnesses describe in clinical detail how their loved ones had died. Walsh made her decision. "I'll take the proposal to the family. If they agree, we have a deal." The meeting with Heidi Dodd and her family was one of the most difficult conversations Jennifer Walsh ever had to facilitate. They gathered in a private conference room at the state's attorney's office. Heidi, her husband Tom, Lisa's sister Rachel, and several other family members. Walsh explained the plea offer carefully, outlining the benefits. No trial, no prolonged legal battle, certainty of outcome, and a lengthy prison sentence. "But it's not life without parole," Heidi said quietly. "He could get out someday." "Theoretically, yes," Walsh acknowledged. "But he'd be an elderly man, and the parole board would have full discretion. Given the nature of these crimes, the likelihood of him ever being released is extremely low." Rachel, Lisa's sister, spoke up. "What happens if we say no? If we want to go to trial?" "Then we go to trial," Walsh said simply, "and we fight for the maximum sentence. But trials are unpredictable, juries are unpredictable, and you'd have to sit through weeks of testimony, seeing things no family should have to see, hearing details about your sister's last moments that you can't unhear." The room fell silent. Heidi stared at the framed photo of Lisa and Kiara she'd brought with her, the same photo she carried to every court hearing. "Can we speak at sentencing?" Heidi finally asked. "Can we tell the judge what he took from us?" "Absolutely," Walsh confirmed. "Victim impact statements are your right. You can tell the court everything you want the judge to know." Heidi looked around the room at her family. Slowly, one by one, they nodded. "Okay," Heidi said, her voice breaking. "Okay, we'll accept the plea. But I want to look him in the eyes when I tell that judge what he did. I want him to hear what he destroyed." On January 23, 2024, DeAndre Holloway stood before Judge Richard Cromwell and entered guilty pleas to 2 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed, media, curious onlookers, domestic violence advocates, and, of course, Lisa's family. Judge Cromwell addressed DeAndre directly. "Mr. Holloway, do you understand that by pleading guilty, you are admitting to causing the deaths of Lisa Dodd and Kiara Dodd Holloway?" "Yes, Your Honor," DeAndre replied, his voice flat. "And do you understand that you face a significant prison sentence as a result of these pleas?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Has anyone forced you to enter these pleas?" "No, Your Honor." The proceedings were brief, procedural, almost anticlimactic after 2.5 years of legal wrangling. But the real moment, the moment everyone was waiting for, would come at sentencing, scheduled for January 2025, exactly 1 year later. The delay was intentional, built into the plea agreement. It gave the probation department time to prepare a comprehensive pre-sentence investigation report. It gave Lisa's family time to prepare their victim impact statements, and it gave DeAndre time to contemplate the magnitude of what he'd admitted to doing. The year passed slowly for everyone involved. DeAndre remained in custody, held at Pontiac Correctional Center while awaiting sentencing. Heidi continued her advocacy work, speaking at events, supporting other survivors of domestic violence, keeping Lisa and Kiara's memory alive. And then finally, January 2025 arrived. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for January 15th, 2025. The same courtroom, the same judge. But the atmosphere was different now. Heavier, more final. This was the end of the legal journey. The moment when justice, whatever that meant, would finally be served. Judge Cromwell's courtroom was standing room only. Every seat filled. Media cameras lined the back wall. Domestic violence advocates wore purple ribbons in solidarity with Lisa's family. And in the front row, Heidi Dodd sat with a thick folder of papers, her victim impact statement carefully prepared over months. Revised and refined until every word carried the weight she needed it to carry. DeAndre was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, shackled at the wrists and ankles. He'd gained weight during his incarceration, his face fuller than in the interrogation footage from years earlier. As he sat at the defense table, he glanced briefly at Lisa's family, but quickly looked away. Judge Cromwell called the court to order. "We're here for sentencing in the matter of People versus DeAndre Holloway. Mr. Holloway has pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder. Before I impose sentence, I want to hear from the victim's family. Mrs. Dodd, the floor is yours." Heidi stood, her hands trembling as she clutched her papers. She approached the podium, took a deep breath, and began to read. "Your Honor, my name is Heidi Dodd, and I am the mother of Lisa Marie Dodd and the grandmother of Kiara Renee Dodd Holloway. I'm here today to tell you about the 2 beautiful souls that were stolen from us by the man sitting in this courtroom." Her voice was steady at first, strengthened by years of practice telling Lisa's story to audiences across Illinois. Lisa was 27 years old when she died. She loved Harry Potter and horror movies. She made the world's best chocolate chip cookies. She had a secret ingredient she'd never tell anyone, not even me. She wanted to be a nurse. She was studying for her entrance exams. She had plans. She had dreams. She had a future. Heidi's voice began to crack. "Kiara was 2 years old. 2 years old. She loved Elmo. She called me Mimi. Her favorite food was macaroni and cheese with the little dinosaur shapes. She would bring me picture books and climb into my lap and make me read them over and over again, even though she'd memorized every word. She'd laugh at the same parts every time like it was the first time she'd heard the story." Tears were streaming down Heidi's face now, but she pushed forward. "Your Honor, I want you to understand what it's like to get that phone call, the one that tells you your daughter is missing. And then the second call, the one that tells you she's been found, but it's not good news. And then having to go to the morgue and—" Her voice broke completely. She had to pause, composing herself. "They asked me to identify her. To identify my baby. But there wasn't enough left to identify. They had to use dental records. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what he did to her?" He took my daughter apart like she was nothing, like she was trash to be disposed of. And my grandbaby, my sweet, innocent grandbaby who never hurt anyone in her entire short life, he murdered her too. Heidi turned to look directly at DeAndre. He kept his eyes down, refusing to meet her gaze. "I want you to look at me," Heidi demanded, her voice suddenly strong with fury. "Look at me, DeAndre. You took everything from me, everything. And I want you to see what that looks like." Slowly, reluctantly, DeAndre raised his eyes. "I don't sleep anymore," Heidi continued, still staring at him. "When I close my eyes, I see Lisa's face. I hear Kiara's laugh. And then I remember they're gone. I remember what you did. I wake up screaming sometimes because in my nightmares I see what you did to them. I see their last moments. I imagine their fear, their pain. Did they call out for me? Did Lisa try to protect Kiara? Did Kiara cry for her mommy?" The courtroom was absolutely silent except for the sound of muffled crying. "You don't get to plead insanity," Heidi said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "You don't get to hide behind mental illness and pretend you're not responsible. You knew what you were doing. You knew it was wrong. And you did it anyway because my daughter tried to leave you. Because she finally found the courage to say no more. And you couldn't accept that. You couldn't accept that she was a person with her own life and her own choices." Heidi turned back to Judge Cromwell. "Your Honor, I'm asking you to impose the maximum sentence allowed by law. I'm asking you to make sure this man never walks free again. I'm asking you to make sure that no other woman, no other child ever has to fear him. He took everything from us. Please, please make sure he can never do this to anyone else." She returned to her seat, collapsing into her husband's arms, her body shaking with sobs. Judge Cromwell waited a moment before speaking. "Thank you, Mrs. Dodd. Does anyone else wish to address the court?" Lisa's sister Rachel stood. Her statement was shorter, but no less powerful. She spoke about growing up with Lisa, about being protective of her little sister, about the guilt she carried for not somehow preventing this tragedy. "I replay every conversation we had in those last months," Rachel said. "Every time she mentioned problems with DeAndre, every time she seemed sad or distant. And I wonder, did I miss something? Could I have done more? Could I have saved her?" She paused, fighting tears. "The answer is no, because DeAndre made his choice. He decided that if he couldn't have her, nobody could. That's not love. That's possession. That's evil. And he needs to pay for it for the rest of his life." After the family finished their statements, Judge Cromwell turned to the defense. "Mr. Morrison, does your client wish to address the court?" Morrison conferred briefly with DeAndre, who shook his head. "No, Your Honor. My client has nothing to say at this time." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. DeAndre wouldn't even apologize, wouldn't even acknowledge the pain he'd caused. Judge Cromwell's expression hardened. He looked down at his notes, at the pre-sentence investigation report, at the photographs of Lisa and Kiara that had been submitted as part of the victim impact evidence. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority and barely contained anger. "Mr. Holloway, I have presided over criminal cases for 23 years. I have seen domestic violence cases. I have seen murders. I have seen crimes that challenge my faith in humanity. But what you did to Lisa Dodd and Kiara Dodd Holloway stands apart even in that terrible catalog of human cruelty." DeAndre remained impassive. "You murdered the mother of your child, a woman who trusted you, who loved you, who bore your daughter. You murdered her in her own home, where she should have been safe. You dismembered her body with such callous disregard for her humanity that you stuffed her remains in a laundry basket like garbage." The judge's voice rose slightly. "And then you murdered your own daughter, a 2-year-old child, a baby who depended on you for protection and care. You took her life simply because she existed, because she was a witness, because she was inconvenient to your plans. Your Honor, Morrison began, but Cromwell held up his hand. I'm not finished. The defense has argued for consideration of your mental illness, and yes, Dr. Weinstein's report indicates you suffer from schizophrenia. But let me be absolutely clear. Mental illness does not absolve you of moral responsibility. Mental illness does not erase the choices you made. You knew enough to try to dispose of the bodies. You knew enough to flee. You knew enough to understand that what you did was wrong. You simply didn't care. Judge Cromwell picked up the sentencing order he'd prepared. The plea agreement calls for 60 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. Some might argue that's insufficient punishment for taking 2 lives. But under truth in sentencing laws, you will serve at least 51 years before you're eligible for parole. You're 28 years old now. You'll be 79 years old before you even have the possibility of release. He looked directly at DeAndre. I want you to understand something. Those 51 years will be hard years. Every day you will wake up behind bars. Every day you will remember what you did and why you're there. And if you live long enough to see a parole board, I will personally submit a statement opposing your release. This family will submit statements. This community will remember. And you will likely die in prison, which is exactly what you deserve. On count 1, murder of Lisa Marie Dodd, I sentence you to 60 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. On count 2, murder of Kiara Renee Dodd Holloway, I sentence you to 60 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. These sentences are to run consecutively, for a total of 120 years. The courtroom erupted. The plea agreement had called for 60 years total, but by running the sentences consecutively, rather than concurrently, Judge Cromwell had effectively doubled DeAndre's sentence. Morrison was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, that violates the plea agreement. The agreement was for 60 years. The agreement, Judge Cromwell said coldly, was for 60 years per count. I have discretion regarding whether those sentences run concurrently or consecutively. Given the heinous nature of these crimes, given that we're dealing with 2 separate victims, I find consecutive sentences appropriate. Mr. Holloway will serve 120 years, with 85% to be served before parole eligibility. That's 102 years minimum. He banged his gavel. This court is adjourned. As bailiffs led DeAndre from the courtroom, he finally showed emotion. Not remorse, not regret, but shock. The reality of 120 years, essentially a life sentence, seemed to penetrate whatever remained of his mental defenses. He stumbled slightly, and a bailiff had to support his arm. Outside the courthouse, Heidi Dodd stood before the cameras one more time. But this time, instead of rage, there was something else in her eyes. Not peace, exactly. Not closure. But perhaps the faintest beginning of healing. It's not enough, she said simply. It could never be enough. There's no sentence that brings my girls back. There's no punishment that undoes what he did. But knowing he'll die in prison, knowing he'll never be free again, that helps. That helps a little. A reporter called out, "What would you want to say to other women in abusive relationships?" Heidi took a breath. I want to say what I've been saying for 3 years now. Leave. Don't wait. Don't make a plan. Don't think you can manage the situation or make it better. The most dangerous time in an abusive relationship is when you try to leave, but staying is guaranteed danger. Leaving gives you a chance. She pulled out a piece of paper from her pocket. Before Lisa died, she wrote a poem. I found it in her journal after she was gone. It was titled, Learning to Leave. I want to read it, because I think it shows that she knew. Deep down, she knew what she needed to do. She just didn't get the chance to do it. Heidi's voice trembled as she read, I am learning to leave, to pack my heart like a suitcase, to fold up memories and tuck them away, to close the door softly behind me. I am learning to leave, to recognize love should not hurt, to understand fear is not commitment, to know I deserve more than survival. I am learning to leave, to trust my instincts when they scream, to stop making excuses for cruelty, to choose myself for once. I am learning to leave, to be brave enough to start over, to build a life from broken pieces, to save myself before it's too late. I am learning, I am trying, I am almost ready to leave. Heidi's voice broke on the final line. She folded the paper carefully and returned it to her pocket. She was almost ready, Heidi whispered. Almost, but almost wasn't enough. So I'm begging anyone listening, don't wait until you're almost ready. Be ready now, leave now, before almost becomes never. The cameras captured everything. Heidi's tears, her husband's supportive embrace, the purple ribbons worn by advocates standing behind her. The image would be shared across social media, the poem reposted thousands of times, Lisa's words reaching women in danger across the country. If there was any meaning to be found in tragedy, perhaps it was this. Lisa Dodd's death and little Kiara's death would not be forgotten. Their story would be told, and maybe, just maybe, their story would save someone else. DeAndre Holloway was transferred to Pontiac Correctional Center to begin serving his sentence. In prison, he's reportedly kept in protective custody due to the nature of his crimes. Child killers are not popular in prison populations, and DeAndre's crimes against his own daughter make him a particular target. Reports from the prison indicate he remains on antipsychotic medications. His schizophrenia managed but not cured. He spends 23 hours a day in his cell, allowed 1 hour of recreation time in a small outdoor cage. He has few visitors. His stepfather, Marcus, came once, shortly after sentencing, but never returned. He will be eligible for parole in the year 2127. He will be 130 years old. In other words, DeAndre Holloway will die in prison, exactly as Judge Cromwell intended. Heidi Dodd continues her advocacy work. She founded the Lisa and Kiara Dodd Foundation, which provides emergency relocation assistance to women fleeing domestic violence. The foundation helps with first month's rent, security deposits, moving costs, all the practical barriers that keep women trapped in dangerous situations. Lisa tried to leave but didn't have anywhere to go, Heidi explained at the foundation's launch event. She was scared and broke and didn't know how she'd support herself and Kiara alone. Those practical concerns kept her in place just long enough for DeAndre to act. I want to make sure no other woman faces those same barriers. In its first year, the foundation helped 73 women and 142 children escape domestic violence situations. Heidi personally speaks to many of the women, sharing Lisa's story, offering the hard-won wisdom that comes only through unbearable loss. Rachel, Lisa's sister, joined the foundation's board. She coordinates with domestic violence shelters across Illinois, helping create networks of support for women in crisis. I couldn't save my sister, Rachel says, but I can honor her memory by saving others. The apartment where the murders occurred has since been demolished. The property owner couldn't find tenants willing to live in a place where such horror had unfolded. Eventually, the building was torn down. The lot sits empty now, a small memorial garden planted where the apartment once stood. Someone maintains it, planting flowers in spring, clearing weeds in summer, laying wreaths in winter. Heidi visits often, sitting on a small bench, talking to the daughters she lost.